Bismarck is a quantum leap for the Germans, and no question. Bismarck is as capable as anything that the British have got.
Cold metal lies deep at 4,790 metres, but something nearby is stirring. A state-of-the-art underwater drone plunges into the Atlantic, heading straight for the wreck of the battleship Bismarck. Its lights sweep across the sea floor, revealing images that unsettle even the experts. So, did the ship truly meet its end, as history claims, or is the wreck telling a different tale? Join us as we uncover the shocking revelation by an underwater drone in the Bismarck Wreck, shining light on a war grave. Far below the ever-moving waves of the Atlantic, almost 470 miles to the west of the French port of Brest, the battleship Bismarck rests in complete and eternal silence. It stands upright in the thick mud of the ocean floor at a staggering depth of nearly 4,790 meters, deeper than most mountains are tall. Here, in water so frigid and dark that sunlight has never touched it,
forces of the water roaring past ripped away the Admiral's Bridge, the mast.
The once mighty warship has become both a relic of the past and a grave for those who sailed with her. This is no ordinary shipwreck. For Germany, the Bismarck is more than steel mangled by war. It is hallowed ground. In May 1941, more than 2,000 sailors went down with her, and today the site is officially recognized as an international war grave. Nations, historians, and explorers all accept that this stretch of seabed is sacred, belonging not only to history, but also to memory, mourning, and respect. Because of that, anyone approaching the wreck must do so with reverence. No divers, no torches, no hands-on salvage were part of this modern expedition. Human beings cannot survive the crushing pressure at such depths, and even if they could, ethics would forbid it. Instead, the witnesses to this silent world were machines. An underwater drone, or ROV, armed with high-definition cameras, sonar sensors, and thrusters so sensitive they could move like a feather falling through the water. The drone was built to hover without disturbing the mud, to glide past the steel without scraping it, and never to enter the hollow corridors that once rang with human life. Its orders were simple: observe, record, and respect. Nothing more. The use of a drone carried both practical and symbolic weight. Practically, it was the only way to reach the abyss without risking lives. Symbolically, it represented the careful balance between curiosity and conscience. The Bismarck is a time capsule, a monument frozen in the depths, but it is also a tomb. To touch it would not only break international law, but also violate humanity's unspoken duty to the dead. The team understood that their eyes could see, but their hands must not touch. Every movement was choreographed with precision. No physical contact, no attempts to move artifacts, no venturing into the ship's interior. The drone was instructed to glide like a ghost, visible, yet untouchable. This restraint makes such missions a moral tightrope. On one side lies the quest for knowledge, history, and truth. On the other lies the duty to treat the wreck not as treasure, but as a memorial. Each decision was measured against the need to preserve dignity. Permissions from authorities were secured, international conventions followed, and the mission leaders approached the task with the gravity of a funeral. For the descendants of the Bismarck's crew, knowing the operation was carried out with care is as meaningful as any discovery. To them, the ship is not merely bent metal, it is family. Then, as the drone's powerful lights pierce the darkness, the bow of the ship begins to emerge from the sediment. The steel giant is not merely resting, it bears scars, twists, and puzzles etched by its violent end. This is more than a monument, it is a riddle. And in that first sweep of the deck, the cameras record something entirely unexpected. So what exactly did the drone capture? Let's find out. A roaring monster. In the closing years of the 1930s, as Europe teetered on the brink of total war, the German Navy sought to assert its power across the oceans. Central to this ambition was a single vessel, the battleship Bismarck.
She is extremely dangerous.
Construction began in 1936, and she was launched in 1939, emerging not merely as steel and rivets, but as a floating fortress. a weapon designed to intimidate, pursue, and survive. Stretching over 820 feet in length and displacing more than 50,000 tons when fully loaded, Bismarck was one of the most formidable battleships ever built. Her armor belt reached thicknesses of up to 320 millimeters, rendering her nearly impervious to enemy shells. Armed with 8 15-inch guns arranged in 4 twin turrets, she could fire shells weighing more than a small automobile, capable of piercing the heaviest armor at extraordinary ranges. Her engines propelled her through the Atlantic at speeds exceeding 30 knots, a terrifying prospect for Allied convoys already threatened by U-boat attacks. To the Nazi regime, Bismarck represented technological supremacy, a vessel designed to restore Germany's dominance over the seas. Yet such symbols inevitably draw attention. In May 1941, during her first major mission, Bismarck slipped from port alongside the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen into the icy waters of the Denmark Strait, seeking access to the Atlantic shipping lanes. There, she met 2 of Britain's mightiest warships, HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales. What followed was among the most dramatic naval engagements of the Second World War. The British opened fire first, their shells streaking across the grey waves, but within minutes, Bismarck's gunners struck with devastating effect. A shell detonated in Hood's magazine, triggering a catastrophic explosion that tore the battlecruiser apart in seconds, claiming more than 1,400 lives. Only 3 crewmen survived. For Germany, the event was a moment of triumph. For Britain, it inflicted a wound so profound that the response was immediate and uncompromising. Bismarck had to be destroyed at any cost. Damaged in the Denmark Strait and leaking fuel, Bismarck attempted a southern escape, pursued by a relentless Royal Navy determined to avenge Hood. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft carriers were drawn into the hunt. The decisive moment arrived on May the 26th, when swordfish biplanes launched from the Carrier Ark Royal struck as daylight faded. Against all odds, one torpedo jammed Bismarck's rudder, locking the ship into a slow, doomed circle. Crippled and unable to maneuver, the battleship became a trapped leviathan, held captive by the sea and fate. On the morning of May the 27th, 1941, the Royal Navy closed in for the final assault. King George V, Rodney, and other ships opened fire at close range. For over an hour, a storm of shells smashed through Bismarck's superstructure, disabled her turrets, and tore open her once imposing hull. Torpedoes struck along her sides, detonating with tremendous force. Inside, crewmen fought desperately against fire and flooding. Flames engulfed compartments, and water filled the lower decks. Yet the engines continued to roar, supplying power to the guns. Damage control teams struggled against impossible odds, even as decks collapsed above them. Survivors later reported that orders were issued to set scuttling charges and open seacocks, denying the enemy the satisfaction of capturing the ship intact. By late morning, Bismarck had disappeared beneath the waves, sliding into the abyss. At the surface, history seemed settled. The Royal Navy had claimed a victory avenging Hood, while German survivors insisted they had destroyed their own vessel to preserve honor. To the wider world, the conclusion was simple. The Bismarck was destroyed. Yet, decades later, when cameras returned to the wreck, the scars etched into her steel told a more complex story, one filled with contradictions rather than certainty. If the Royal Navy's shellfire had truly destroyed her, why did the armoured citadel remain so intact? Why had so much of her structure survived the bombardment that was meant to obliterate her completely? Let's find out. Inside the Bismarck Wreck. When Dr. Robert Ballard and his team finally found the Bismarck in June 1989, nearly 4 years after discovering the Titanic, the world watched with rapt attention. Deep in the Atlantic, almost 3 miles below the surface, the cameras captured a scene that was both awe-inspiring and eerie. The Bismarck rested upright in the mud, her massive steel hull remarkably intact despite the savage battle that had sent her to the seabed. Her bow rose from the silt like the wall of a dark cathedral, massive and unyielding, while her superstructure, though battered and twisted beyond recognition, still hinted at the ship's former grandeur. Ballard's images showed that the stern had separated from the main body of the ship, lying twisted and broken, likely torn apart by the enormous stresses of hitting the ocean floor. The main turrets, each weighing over 1,000 tons, had broken free under their own weight during the descent and now lay scattered around the wreck, upside down like toppled monuments in a silent underwater cemetery. In many ways, the state of the Bismarck surprised historians. Later expeditions in the 21st century, using M1R submersibles and remotely operated vehicles, brought even more clarity. High-definition footage allowed experts to examine the hull closely, following individual shell marks, torpedo hits, and areas where the steel plating had bent and buckled. What became clear was that the Bismarck's destruction was not simply the result of enemy fire. It was a more complex story, a combination of damage from shells and torpedoes, coupled with catastrophic stresses as she sank into the abyss. One of the most haunting discoveries was how well-preserved parts of the wreck remained. Much of the Bismarck's deck had been covered with teak wood planks, and even decades later, in the freezing, oxygen-poor waters nearly 3 miles down, some of these planks still clung to the steel. Faded and fragile, they resisted decay stubbornly. In other areas, traces of paint still clung to the armoured hull, muted but unmistakable, echoing the ship's proud appearance in her prime. Unlike wrecks in shallower waters, where corrosion quickly turns steel to rust, the Bismarck rests in a suspended moment, preserved by cold and darkness. Through the camera lens, it is as if one can peer directly into 1941, the ship frozen in the instant of her violent end. But the Bismarck story is not contained in her hull alone. Around her lies a vast debris field that tells of her final moments. Masts lie broken and scattered, torn away during her plunge. Rangefinders, once perched atop her superstructure, rest half buried in mud, their shattered lenses staring blankly into the abyss. Secondary gun mounts lie twisted, ripped from their housings as the ship capsized. Each piece is a fragment of a timeline, marking the chaos of battle, fire, and collapse. By studying their positions and distances from the main wreck, experts can reconstruct the ship's final throes. When the turrets fell, when the stern broke free, and when the upper works crumbled under the immense weight of water and pressure. The seabed becomes not just a grave, but a frozen crime scene, where every bent plate, every shard of wood, every scattered artifact is evidence. For decades, these clues whispered an incomplete truth, pointing in multiple directions. Today, new technology promises to turn those whispers into a voice. Modern underwater drones, equipped with millimeter-scale scanning, can capture details that no diver or earlier camera could ever reach. These scans allow researchers not just to map the wreck, but to interpret it, turning the scattered debris from mystery into motive. Each precise image brings them closer to understanding the Bismarck's final, silent story. Was the Bismarck destroyed by enemy fire, or by her own crew's determination to avoid capture? Did she break apart because of torpedoes, or because no steel could withstand the stress of her final plunge? Let's take a closer look. Mystery in the depths of the Atlantic. The fate of the battleship Bismarck has always hung in a strange balance, caught between two powerful stories. On one side stand the official reports of the Royal Navy, which celebrated the ship's sinking as the grand result of an unrelenting chase and a crushing display of British firepower. According to their version, shells and torpedoes tore into the German giant until she was left broken, drifting, and hopeless. On the other side are the voices of the German survivors, men who swore that their commanders refused to let the enemy claim the ship as a prize. They insisted that orders were shouted in the chaos: open the sea valves, set the demolition charges, scuttle the ship before the British could board her. In their telling, Bismarck did not fall only to enemy fire. She was sent down deliberately by her own crew. This is where the wreck itself becomes more than a ruin. It becomes a witness. And in the last decades, as modern drones have dived almost 3 miles below the surface of the Atlantic, they have given the world sharper eyes to revisit an old debate. Early expeditions in the late 1980s and 1990s had shown that both external and internal damage scarred the ship, but the evidence was often blurred, coarse, and easy to argue over. Now, with cameras that can capture details at the millimeter scale, the wounds of the Bismarck appear with stunning clarity. Along her steel hull, the cameras reveal gashes and ruptures. Some plates are smashed inward, leaving jagged holes like fists punching from outside. Others are curled outward, peeled back like the skin of a fruit, a shape that suggests an explosion from within. And here lies the key. The direction of bent steel tells a story. Metal pushed inward points to outside violence, shellfire, torpedoes, or even the crushing grip of the ocean as compartments collapsed. Metal forced outward suggests something very different. Charges set by the crew, or machinery ripping apart under unbearable pressure. The stern tells perhaps the harshest tale. New scans reveal shapes that do not neatly match what torpedoes alone could do. In some areas, steel has buckled inward, exactly as expected from outside hits. But close by, plates have burst outward, as if some force inside the ship had pressed with explosive strength. Experts still disagree, and their arguments echo the very confusion of that day in May 1941. Reading the steel is like reading handwriting left in fire and violence. The angle of a crack, the curl of a torn plate, the edges of ripped rivets, all of it becomes a code. Drone footage even shows what naval architects call petaling, when metal bends outward like the petals of a flower around a wound. On Bismarck, some petals fold inward, a textbook sign of torpedoes or shells. Others fold outward, pointing to forces born inside. Survivors remembered the hammering of shells, the roar of explosions above, but they also remembered the final orders: open the seacocks, set the charges, abandon ship. Perhaps the truth lies in the grim union of both versions. The Royal Navy's attack had already dealt wounds so deep that survival was impossible. Yet the German crew may have quickened the end, choosing to sink her themselves rather than surrender her. If so, the ship died twice, once at the hands of her enemies, and again at the will of her own. Still, the wreck itself refuses to answer with certainty. Every new scan deepens the mystery instead of solving it. The bow and the midsection cry out with scars of external punishment, while the stern whispers of something more deliberate, more controlled. Historians call this a paradox. Engineers call it conflicting evidence. But for the drone operators staring at the glowing feeds of high-resolution cameras, it feels almost as though the ship is arguing with itself. A steel body split between two voices, one crying of battle, the other of self-destruction, neither voice willing to be silenced. Could both sets of scars be true at once? Could the Bismarck have been battered mercilessly by the British and at the same time finished off by her own men? Let's explore further. Bismarck's progressive flooding. As the underwater drone moved in slow, careful sweeps along the Bismarck's massive hull, a larger story began to take shape. The dents, holes, and ruptures were not just random scars left by the battle. They followed a pattern. When experts combined the high-resolution scans into one full image, they saw that the damage lined up along specific frames of the ship, like a row of stepping stones leading to collapse. This was not the clear mark of a single kill shot, nor the sudden destruction caused by one decisive torpedo. Instead, it looked like a chain reaction, where one failure triggered another, until the ship's fate could no longer be stopped. Engineers call this progressive flooding. It happens when seawater floods one compartment, then spreads into the next, and then into the next again, building up speed until the ship's stability is destroyed. The scans of the Bismarck showed that her end may not have been quick, but instead a catastrophic sequence, a domino effect of steel giving way under the sea's pressure. The stern reveals the most unsettling part of this story. Earlier missions had already shown that the stern was separated from the rest of the hull, but the new drone surveys brought out hidden details that raised new questions. The steel frames in this section show stress levels far greater than what any single torpedo should have caused. The evidence suggests that, as water rushed in, the stern bent and twisted under enormous forces until it finally tore away. Torpedoes may have started the damage, but the final break seems to have been caused by the combined weight of flooding and the violent pull of water as the ship lost buoyancy. Structural engineers studying the digital models found cracks and breaks that matched what they call terminal loads. These are the massive, final forces that appear only in a ship's last moments, when it is fighting not just enemy fire, but the crushing weight of its own destruction. For the experts, this discovery was deeply unsettling. For decades, naval historians have told the story of the Bismarck's end as a battle of wills, British firepower against German scuttling, but the wreck itself tells a different version. It shows signs of both. Battle damage that set off progressive flooding, which then tore the ship apart from within. This means her end was not as clean or simple as either side wanted the story to be. Naval designers had always tried to stop disasters by dividing ships into compartments, believing that flooding could be contained. But the wreck shows that under certain conditions, those safety measures fail. Once flooding spreads freely, collapse becomes exponential, not gradual, and nothing a captain or crew can do will stop it. So, what do you think about the surprising revelation by the underwater drone? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.